They called me paranoid. They whispered it in the pristine hallways of the hospital, muttered it over their overpriced lattes at the country club, and sighed it across the mahogany dining table of my own home. Avada is getting old, they'd say, their voices dripping with that sickening, patronizing pity. The grief has finally fractured her mind. I am 68 years old. I have lived through the civil rights movement in the sweltering heat of Atlanta, raised a black son to become one of the top corporate architects in Georgia, and buried a daughter-in-law I loved as my own flesh and blood. My mind is as sharp as the crease in my Sunday church trousers. But when you tell people that a beautiful, successful 32-year-old woman is trying to slowly destroy a 7-year-old boy, they don't look at the woman. They look at the grandmother. They look at the wrinkles around my eyes and decide that I am the one losing my grip on reality. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't see the cold, calculating emptiness in Ava's eyes when Alex left the room. And they certainly didn't see the small, innocuous-looking packet of powder hidden beneath the heavy linen tablecloth on the day of the wedding. Before I tell you about the powder, the betrayal, and the storm that nearly swallowed my family whole, you need to understand the fragile glass house we were living in before Ava threw the first stone. My son, Alex, was a man whose heart had been hollowed out by grief. 3 years ago, his wife, Maria, was driving home from a client meeting in a torrential Georgia downpour. A semi-truck blew a tire on the I-85. The police officer who stood on my porch that night, his hat in his hands and rain dripping from his raincoat, didn't have to say a word. I saw the pity in his eyes, and my world collapsed. Maria was sunlight. She was an Afro-Latina woman with a laugh that could fill a stadium and a gentleness that made my reserved, workaholic son bloom into a devoted family man. When she died, Alex didn't just mourn. He shut down. He packed up his heart, locked it in a steel vault, and buried himself in architectural blueprints. He was present in body, paying the bills, keeping the lights on in their beautiful suburban home, but his soul was gone. The collateral damage of Alex's absence was Leo. Leo was only 4 when his mother's car was crushed. Now at 7, he was a ghost of a child. The bright, babbling toddler who used to chase our golden retriever around the backyard was replaced by a quiet, hypervigilant boy who startled at loud noises and rarely spoke above a whisper. He clung to his red toy fire engine, the last gift Maria gave him, rubbing the paint off its wheels with his small, anxious thumbs. With Alex working 80-hour weeks to outrun his ghosts, I moved in. I left my quiet townhouse in Decatur and took over the master guest room. I became the anchor. I cooked the meals, ironed the school uniforms, and sat by Leo's bed every night, humming the old gospel hymns my own mother used to sing until his night terrors subsided. I wasn't alone in this heavy lifting. My adopted daughter, Lucy, was my saving grace. Lucy was 28, a kindergarten teacher with a heart so big it sometimes got her into trouble. She had come to us as a troubled foster teen, and we had loved her into a confident, radiant young woman. Lucy adored Leo. She was the only one who could coax a genuine missing-tooth smile out of him. She would spend her weekends building elaborate Lego fortresses with him on the living room rug, and more importantly, she meticulously managed his diet. Leo had a severe, life-threatening allergy to oysters and related bivalve mollusks. It wasn't just a rash, it was total anaphylactic shock. A cross-contamination on a cutting board, a hidden dash of oyster sauce in a takeout container. It was enough to close his throat and stop his heart within minutes. Lucy and I ran the kitchen like a sterile laboratory. We read every label. We trusted no one. We had built a fragile, quiet peace, a limp but steady rhythm of survival. Then Alex brought Ava home. It was a crisp October evening. The dogwoods in the front yard were turning a brilliant, fiery red. Alex had called me that afternoon, his voice sounding lighter than it had in years. "Mom, I'm bringing someone to dinner. Her name is Ava. She's the new marketing director at the firm. I think she's special." I spent 3 hours roasting a chicken, my stomach tied in complex knots of hope and protective anxiety. I wanted my son to be happy. God knows he deserved to smile again. But stepping into Maria's shoes was going to take a woman of immense grace and patience. When the doorbell rang, Lucy and I stood in the foyer. Alex opened the door, and Ava stepped into the warm glow of the chandelier. If Maria was sunlight, Ava was a diamond. Cold, flawless, and brilliantly sharp. She was a strikingly beautiful white woman with sleek, honey-blonde hair falling perfectly past her shoulders, wearing a tailored navy dress that screamed quiet luxury. Her makeup was immaculate, her smile bright and perfectly measured. "Avada, it is such an absolute honor to finally meet you," she said, her voice a melodic, practiced purr. She handed me a bottle of Pinot Noir that cost more than my first car. "Alex has told me so much about the matriarch of this family." "Welcome to our home, Ava," I said, taking the wine. Her hands were icy cold. Dinner was a masterclass in charm. Ava asked all the right questions. She complimented my cooking, asked Lucy engaging questions about her teaching methods, and looked at Alex with an expression of such absolute adoration that he seemed to glow under her gaze. She was articulate, funny, and incredibly attentive. But I am an old woman who has seen many faces, and I watch the things people don't think you're watching. I watched Ava when Leo was brought to the table. The boy sat silently, staring at his mashed potatoes. Ava leaned over, producing a beautifully wrapped box of imported Swiss chocolates from her designer tote bag. "Leo, sweetie, I brought this just for you," she cooed, her voice raising an octave into that artificial pitch adults use when they don't actually know how to talk to children. Leo didn't look up. He didn't reach for the box. He just shrank back into his chair, his little shoulders tensing, his eyes darting toward me. "Leo, say thank you," Alex prompted gently, but there was a subtle edge of embarrassment in his tone. "It's okay, Alex, he's just shy," Ava said quickly, offering a sympathetic, indulgent smile. But in that split second, before she turned her face back to Alex, I saw her eyes lock onto Leo. The warmth vanished. Her gaze was flat, hard, and entirely devoid of affection. It was the look you give a stray dog sitting on your freshly manicured lawn. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. As the weeks turned into months, Ava's presence in the house expanded like a slow-moving fog. She practically moved in by Thanksgiving. Alex was hopelessly, blindly in love. For him, Ava was a lifeboat. She organized his life, planned lavish weekend getaways, and filled the house with expensive floral arrangements and the smell of expensive perfume. To Alex, she was the perfect partner. To me, she was a master illusionist. The microaggressions started subtly. They were so small, so seemingly innocent, that if I complained, I would sound like a bitter, territorial mother-in-law. It was the way she rearranged the pantry, moving Leo's allergy-safe snacks to the top shelf where neither he nor I could easily reach them without a step stool. "Oh, Avada, I just thought it looked so much cleaner this way. Let me get that for you. You shouldn't be climbing on stools at your age," she would say, her hand gently resting on my arm while she looked at Alex to ensure he witnessed her caring nature. It was the way she undermined Lucy. When Lucy baked Leo a batch of allergen-free oatmeal cookies, Ava brought home a massive, gorgeous bakery cake. "I just couldn't resist," Ava said, slicing the cake for Alex. "Lucy's cookies are so rustic, but I thought we should have a real treat tonight." But the most insidious campaign she waged was against my competence. Ava began planting seeds in Alex's mind, carefully watering them with faux concern. One Tuesday afternoon while I was folding laundry upstairs, I heard a shatter of glass from the kitchen, followed by Leo's startled cry. My heart leaped into my throat. I rushed downstairs as fast as my arthritic knees would allow. I found Leo backed against the kitchen island, trembling. A broken crystal vase scattered across the tile floor. A puddle of water and crushed lilies ruined the rug. Ava was standing a few feet away, holding a broom. Alex had just walked in through the garage door, his briefcase dropping from his hand. "What happened?" "Oh, Alex, it's a mess," Ava sighed, rushing to his side and touching his chest. I was just turning around and Leo was running through the kitchen. You know how hyper he gets. And he just bumped right into the console table. "It's okay. Nobody is hurt." "I wasn't running," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. She pushed the table. Ava let out a soft, forgiving laugh. "Leo, honey, we don't tell stories. It was an accident. Avada, I'm so sorry. I know you were supposed to be watching him, but I guess you were busy upstairs? It's so hard to keep an eye on a boy his age all the time. Maybe he needs more structured supervision." Alex looked from Ava to Leo, and then to me. His brow furrowed. "Mom, where were you?" "I was putting away his clothes, Alex. For 5 minutes," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I looked at Ava. The vase had been sitting in the center of a heavy oak console table. A 7-year-old boy brushing past it wouldn't have knocked it over. It had to be pulled. "It's fine, Mom," Alex sighed, rubbing his temples. "Just Try to keep a closer eye on him. Ava, thank you for cleaning it up. That night, as I walked past Alex's study, the door was slightly ajar. I heard Ava's soft, persuasive voice drifting into the hallway. She's doing her best, babe. She really is. But she's almost 70. Raising a traumatized child is exhausting for a young woman, let alone someone her age. Have you noticed she forgot to buy his special milk again yesterday? I just worry. I worry about Leo's safety, and I worry about her health. Maybe it's time we start thinking about other arrangements. You and I are a team now. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my blood turning to ice. She wasn't just trying to be the woman of the house. She was systematically trying to remove me from it, and she was using my grandson as the wedge to do it. I needed to know who this woman really was. I refused to believe that a successful marketing director had coincidentally stumbled into my son's life and immediately decided to play an obsessive game of domestic chess. There was a desperate, almost hungry edge to her perfection. The opportunity presented itself 2 weeks before the wedding. Alex and Ava had gone to a cake tasting appointment in Buckhead. Lucy had taken Leo to the park. I was alone in the house. Ava had started moving her boxes into the master bedroom, cluttering the walk-in closet. She had asked me earlier that morning, with her usual saccharine smile, if I could locate her blue cashmere wrap in one of the unpacked boxes in the study. I'd do it myself, Avada, but I simply don't have the time today. Be a dear? I walked into the study. 3 cardboard boxes sat neatly stacked in the corner. I opened the top one. It was full of winter clothes. No blue wrap. I opened the second one. Books, mostly marketing textbooks and self-help novels. I pulled the third box out. It was heavier. As I dragged it across the carpet, the bottom flap, poorly taped, gave way. The contents spilled onto the floor. It wasn't clothing. It was a memory box. Old journals, loose photographs, ticket stubs, and college memorabilia scattered across the Persian rug. I knelt down with a groan, annoyed at the mess, and began gathering the items to shove them back in. My hand brushed against a glossy, thick booklet. Atlanta University, Alumni Magazine, Class of 2016. I paused. Alex didn't go to Atlanta University. He went to Georgia Tech. But Maria had gone to Atlanta University. I flipped the magazine open. A loose photograph slipped out from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up. It was a candid shot taken at a college party. The room in the photo was dimly lit, packed with laughing students holding red plastic cups. In the center, radiant and beautiful, was Maria. She was laughing, her head thrown back, wearing a bright yellow dress that contrasted beautifully with her dark skin. But it wasn't Maria that made my breath hitch in my throat. It was the background. Standing in the shadows behind Maria, slightly out of focus, was a young woman with sleek blonde hair. It was Ava. She wasn't smiling. She was staring at Maria with an expression of such intense, naked envy that it seemed to burn through the glossy photo paper. My hands began to tremble. I dropped the photo and reached for one of the journals that had fallen from the box. It was bound in black leather. I felt a pang of guilt. A grandmother shouldn't snoop, but the instinct protecting my bloodline was screaming louder than my manners. I opened the journal to a random page. The handwriting was neat, sharp, and tightly coiled. October 14th. She got the internship. Of course she did. The diversity hire strikes again. Everyone loves Maria. Oh, Maria is so bright. Maria is so warm. It makes me sick. I work twice as hard. I look twice as good. But they look right past me to her. Even Alex. I saw the way he looked at her at the mixer tonight. He didn't even remember my name. He will. One day he'll realize what a mistake he's making. I flipped the pages frantically. Dates spanning over a decade. Pages upon pages of resentment, obsession, and a chillingly calculated tracking of Maria's life. Ava had documented Maria's engagement to Alex, their wedding, the birth of Leo. Ava hadn't met Alex at the marketing firm by chance. She had orchestrated the transfer. She had waited in the wings, watching my son's life unfold, simmering in her own toxic jealousy. And when Maria died in that tragic accident, Ava didn't see a tragedy. She saw a vacancy. She saw an opportunity to finally take the life she believed she was owed. The house, the wealth, the handsome architect husband. But there was one glaring imperfection in her stolen fairy tale. A walking, talking reminder of the woman she despised. Leo. I closed the journal, my chest tight, the air in the study suddenly feeling too thin to breathe. I looked at the photograph of Maria on Alex's desk, the one Ava hadn't quite managed to pack away yet. "I see her now, Maria," I whispered into the empty room, my voice trembling with a mixture of terror and rising ferocious rage. "I see exactly what she is. Ava didn't just want to marry my son. She wanted to erase Maria completely. And to do that, she had to get rid of the people who kept Maria's memory alive. She had to get rid of me. And God help me, she had to get rid of Leo." I carefully placed the journal and the photograph exactly where I found them, taped the bottom of the box, and pushed it back into the corner. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. The fear in my chest began to harden into something else, something cold and sharp. I am Avada. I have survived the storms of this world, and I will be damned if I let a ghost from a college hallway tear down the walls of my family. The wedding was in 2 weeks. I knew then that I couldn't just tell Alex. He was under her spell, high on the illusion she had spun for him. If I went to him with an old journal, Ava would spin it. She would cry. She would say I was invading her privacy. She would twist the narrative until I was the villain and she was the victim. I needed proof. I needed her to make a mistake. I just didn't know that her mistake would be a small, deadly packet of powder slipped under a tablecloth, and that the battlefield she would choose would be her own wedding day. The venue Ava had chosen for the reception was Le Marin, an outrageously expensive seafood and steakhouse nestled in the opulent heart of Buckhead, Atlanta. It was a glass-walled architectural marvel, surrounded by manicured gardens that were currently strung with thousands of fairy lights. Inside, the ceiling was draped in white silk, and crystal chandeliers cast a fractured icy glow over the 50 round tables dressed in heavy ivory linen. It smelled of roasted sea bass, expensive champagne, and the suffocatingly sweet scent of hundreds of white lilies, Ava's favorite. I sat at table 1, the seat of honor, feeling as though I were sitting in the center of a beautifully decorated slaughterhouse. I wore an emerald green dress that I had bought years ago with Maria, but inside I was armored for war. I hadn't slept in the 2 weeks since I found Ava's journal. I had watched her every move, scrutinized every meal, intercepted every glass of water she handed to my grandson. But Ava was a professional. She played the doting bride-to-be flawlessly. If she suspected that I knew the rotting truth beneath her perfect veneer, she never let it slip. Alex looked devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, but there was a tightness around his eyes. He was smiling, shaking hands, and accepting congratulations, but he looked like a man wading through a dream he didn't quite understand. And then there was Leo. My sweet boy was drowning in a tuxedo that felt a size too rigid. He sat between me and Lucy, his small hands clutching his red toy fire engine beneath the table. His eyes were wide, darting around the noisy room, terrified of the loud jazz band and the clinking glasses. "Eat a little of your bread, baby," Lucy whispered, breaking off a piece of a safe, allergen-free roll she had brought herself in her purse. She smoothed his hair, her face tight with the same unspoken anxiety that gripped my chest. We had explicitly forbidden the kitchen from serving any seafood to our table, but the ambient smell of the restaurant alone was enough to keep Lucy and me on high alert. Ava made her grand entrance to a swell of applause. She looked like a vision cut from a magazine, draped in a backless, beaded white gown that caught the chandelier light like freshly fallen snow. She glided across the floor, her smile radiant, and threw her arms around Alex. The photographer's flashes went off in a blinding cascade, but I wasn't looking at the bride. I was looking at the timeline. 10 minutes prior to her grand entrance, while Alex was greeting the last of the stragglers in the lobby, Ava had come to table 1 to check on her favorite little man. She had knelt beside Leo, blocking my view of him with the sweeping train of her dress, and whispered something in his ear. I had immediately stood up and crossed around the table, but by the time I reached them, she was already standing, kissing the top of his head before rushing off to the bridal suite to line up for the entrance. The dinner service began. Waiters moved like synchronized swimmers, carrying silver trays of lobster bisque and crab-stuffed mushrooms. Lucy and I hovered over Leo's plate of plain roasted chicken and vegetables like hawks. Suddenly, Leo stopped pushing his carrots around. He dropped his fork. The heavy silver hit the porcelain with a sharp clink. I turned to him. His skin, usually a warm, rich brown, had taken on an ashen, grayish pallor. He was staring straight ahead, his chest heaving slightly. "Leo?" I asked, my voice slicing through the smooth jazz playing in the background. "What is it, sweetheart?" He brought a trembling hand to his throat. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice sounding raspy, like dry leaves scraping together. "My throat feels fuzzy. It's hot." The world stopped spinning. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, all of it vanished into a deafening underwater silence. Anaphylaxis. "Lucy, the EpiPen, now!" I hissed, my hands immediately going to Leo's face. He was warm. Too warm. His breathing was becoming shallow. Lucy's face drained of color as she ripped open her clutch, pulling out the bright yellow auto-injector. "He hasn't eaten anything," she panicked, her eyes wide with terror. "Avada, I swear to God, he hasn't touched the food." "What did you put in your mouth, Leo? Tell Grandma right now," I pleaded, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Leo's eyes were watering, panic setting in as his airway began to swell. "Nothing, just Auntie Ava's vitamin." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What vitamin, baby?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Before she walked in," Leo gasped, rubbing his neck. She said I looked tired. She gave me a special powder vitamin. Said it was a secret so I'd be strong for the pictures." My gaze snapped to the floor where Ava had been kneeling 10 minutes ago. I didn't care about my arthritic knees. I didn't care about my emerald dress. And I didn't care about the confused looks from the neighboring tables. I dropped to the carpet, crawling under the heavy, floor-length linen tablecloth. It was dark, smelling of spilled wine and floor wax. I swept my hands frantically over the carpet beneath Leo's chair. My fingers brushed against something hard and cylindrical. I grabbed it and pulled myself out from under the table. It was a small amber glass vial. The label read, "Natural Supplements, Immune Boost, Proprietary Blend." But the cap was slightly unscrewed, and dusting the rim was a fine grayish-white powder. I brought it to my nose. It didn't smell like vitamins. It smelled faintly of brine, of low tide, of the sea. It was oyster powder, highly concentrated, lethal to my grandson. "Lucy, hit him with the pen," I ordered, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "Do it now. Call an ambulance." As Lucy jammed the EpiPen into Leo's thigh and the boy let out a sharp cry, I stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The panic that had gripped me seconds before was incinerated by a white-hot, blinding rage. Ava was trying to kill him. Right here. Under the bright lights, surrounded by hundreds of people. She was trying to create a medical emergency she could blame on the restaurant. Or worse, blame on my negligence for taking my eyes off him for 5 seconds. Across the room, on the small elevated stage, Alex was tapping a spoon against his champagne flute. The room quieted down. He smiled warmly, looking out at the sea of faces, and raised his glass. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," Alex began, his voice echoing through the microphone. "To celebrate a new beginning. To celebrate Ava, the woman who brought light back into my—" I didn't let him finish. I marched across the ballroom floor. People stared as I passed. A 68-year-old woman with a face like carved granite, holding a small amber vial as if it were a grenade. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. Alex stopped talking, lowering his glass, a look of profound confusion crossing his face. "Mom, what are you doing?" Ava, standing beside him, stiffened. Her eyes darted from my face to my hand, and for a fraction of a second, the perfect mask slipped. I saw raw, unadulterated panic. I reached out and took the microphone from my son's hand. The feedback whined sharply, making a few guests wince. The room was deathly silent. "My grandson is currently going into anaphylactic shock at table 1, I said. My voice was steady, projecting clearly across the massive room. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The gravity of my words hung in the air like a guillotine. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I turned my body slowly, fixing my gaze on the bride in her immaculate white dress. And he is going into shock because this woman, the bride, deliberately fed him concentrated oyster powder 10 minutes ago. I held the amber vial high in the air. Pandemonium erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as guests stood up. At table 1, paramedics were already rushing through the back doors. Lucy must have called them the moment she injected the EpiPen. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Alex shouted, grabbing my arm. He looked frantically toward Leo's table, seeing the paramedics swarming his son. "Are you out of your mind?" "Look at her, Alex," I commanded, pointing a trembling finger at Ava. "Ask her what this is. Ask her why she snuck under the table to feed a highly allergic child an unprescribed powder. Ava staggered backward, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears instantly welled in her eyes, spilling over her perfectly applied mascara. She looked like a trapped, terrified doe. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. "Avada, no!" Ava cried out, her voice breaking into a devastating sob. "How could you say that? How could you accuse me of such a monstrous thing? Because I found the vial where you dropped it, you wicked girl." I stepped toward her, the microphone amplifying my fury. "You thought you could make it look like an accident, a restaurant mix-up, but you forgot I was watching you." The crowd was murmuring loudly now, a mix of horror, disbelief, and outrage. People were whispering, pointing. I had her. I had exposed the monster to the light. But I had underestimated the depth of Ava's manipulation. She didn't crumble under the spotlight. She used it. "Alex, please!" Ava sobbed, throwing herself against his chest. She grabbed the microphone from my hand. "It's not what she thinks. I swear to God, it's not what she thinks." Ava turned to the crowd, her face streaked with tears, looking utterly desperate and broken. "It's oral immunotherapy. OIT!" she cried into the mic, her voice shaking with righteous indignation. "It's a medical treatment. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to cure him." The murmurs in the room faltered. Confusion replaced the outrage. "What?" Alex stammered, holding her shoulders. "Ava, what are you talking about?" Ava wiped her eyes, looking up at him with the expression of a martyr who had just been crucified. "I've been taking Leo to Dr. Eris Thorne in secret for the last 2 months. He's one of the top pediatric allergists in the state. He said if we introduce microscopic measured doses of the allergen, the powder in that vial, Leo's immune system will build a tolerance. He could be a normal boy, Alex. He could go to birthday parties without fear. He could eat at restaurants without his grandmother treating him like he's made of glass." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the sheer brilliance of the lie. Oral immunotherapy. It was a real cutting-edge treatment, but it was done in clinical settings, strictly monitored by doctors, never casually given under a table by a stepmother. "You're lying," I said, my voice shaking, though less from anger now, and more from the terrifying realization of how deep her trap went. "You gave him a lethal dose. You tried to kill him." "It was a microdose!" Ava screamed back at me, pointing an accusing finger. "It was measured perfectly by the pharmacy. Dr. Thorne said a mild reaction was normal, that it meant his body was fighting it." Ava turned back to Alex, her voice dropping into a desperate, pleading whisper that the microphone caught perfectly. "Alex, your mother wouldn't listen. I brought up treatments months ago, but she shut me down. She wants him to stay sick, Alex. She wants him to be dependent on her forever. She's suffocating him with her paranoia. I just wanted to help him live a normal life." From the crowd, Ava's sister Gloria suddenly rushed forward, holding a sleek leather folder. She practically shoved it into Alex's hands. "She's telling the truth, Alex. Here are the medical records, the receipts from Dr. Thorne's clinic. Ava paid for it out of her own pocket because she loved him so much." Alex opened the folder with shaking hands. The documents looked official. Clinic letterheads, treatment schedules, consent forms bearing Ava's forged signature as Leo's guardian. Alex looked up, his eyes wide and devastated. He looked at the medical papers, then at the paramedics wheeling his son out on a stretcher, and finally at me. "Mom," Alex whispered, the word laced with a sickening mixture of heartbreak and dawning suspicion. Did you stop his treatments?" "Alex, no!" I grabbed his arm. "There were no treatments. She fabricated this. She's trying to get rid of me. She's trying to—" "Enough!" Alex yelled, his voice cracking. The sound echoed off the glass walls. He pulled his arm away from my grasp as if I had burned him. Ava buried her face in Alex's shoulder, weeping uncontrollably. A few of the guests, Ava's friends, began to glare at me. The narrative had shifted with terrifying speed. I was no longer the heroic grandmother exposing a murderer. I was the overbearing, paranoid old woman who had violently interrupted a wedding because I didn't understand modern medicine, standing in the way of a loving stepmother trying to cure my grandson. The police arrived 5 minutes later, called by the restaurant management due to the disturbance, but no one was arrested. Ava presented the medical documents to the officers through her tears. She explained the therapy protocol, admitted that perhaps she had been overzealous and foolish to administer the dose at the wedding without telling the family, but insisted her intentions were purely medical. She framed my accusation as a tragic misunderstanding born from a grieving territorial grandmother losing her grip on reality. The officers, looking at a beautiful, crying bride and a folder full of official-looking medical jargon, wrote it off as a severe family dispute and a medical accident. The wedding was ruined. The guests filtered out in uncomfortable silence, leaving half-eaten meals and melting ice sculptures behind. I stood alone near the stage, watching Alex help Ava into a town car, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist to support her shaking frame. He didn't look back at me. Ava had lost the wedding reception, but she had won the war. She had successfully planted the seed she needed. As the taillights of their car disappeared into the Atlanta night, I realized the terrifying truth. The battle to save Leo wasn't over. It had just moved from the shadows into the courtroom, and Ava had just convinced the world, and my son, that I was the real danger. The aftermath of the wedding did not arrive with a loud explosion. It crept in like a suffocating winter freeze. Leo survived. The EpiPen and the rapid response of the Atlanta paramedics had kept his airway open just long enough. But as I sat beside his hospital bed for 3 agonizing days, listening to the rhythmic, synthetic beep of his heart monitor, I watched the last remaining sparks of his childhood extinguish. He woke up exhausted, terrified, and fundamentally broken. When we finally brought him home, the house felt like a tomb. Alex did not come with us. He had packed his bags the morning after the wedding debacle, his face a stony, unreadable mask, and moved into a luxury high-rise condo in Midtown with Ava. He told me, his voice devoid of any warmth, that he needed space to figure out the truth. But the truth, it seemed, had already been rewritten by Ava's masterful hand. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Alex. It was a man in a cheap gray suit handing me a thick manila envelope. I opened it on the kitchen island, my reading glasses perched on the bridge of my nose, with Lucy standing anxiously over my shoulder. They were legal summons. Ava and Alex were petitioning the Fulton County Family Court for full unmitigated custody of Leo. I scanned the dense, aggressive legal jargon, my stomach plummeting into an icy abyss. Ava's lawyers had spun a narrative of pure fiction, painting me as a deeply disturbed, grieving old woman suffering from Munchausen syndrome by proxy. The petition claimed I was intentionally keeping Leo sick, isolating him from his father, and creating an environment of paranoia and emotional abuse. They cited my violent outburst at the wedding as proof of my mental instability. Attached were the forged documents from Dr. Thorne validating her narrative that I had aggressively interrupted a legitimate medical treatment. "They want to take him away," I whispered, the paper trembling in my hands. "She wants to strip me of all my rights, push me into a nursing home, and take my grandson." Lucy's jaw tightened. Her eyes, usually so soft and nurturing, hardened into dark obsidian. "We are not going to let that happen, Avada. I will sell my car, I will empty my savings, but we are going to fight her in that courtroom." But Ava wasn't just fighting us in the courtroom. She was fighting a covert war inside my grandson's mind. As part of the temporary custody arrangement pending the trial, the court mandated that Leo attend twice-weekly trauma counseling sessions. Naturally, Ava's legal team had aggressively lobbied for a specific child psychologist, Dr. Elias Vance, a suave, high-priced specialist operating out of a pristine, minimalist office in Sandy Springs. I was forbidden from attending the drop-offs. Lucy had to take him. For the first few weeks, Leo would return from Dr. Vance's office quieter than usual. But by the 4th week, the changes became chilling. He stopped asking me to read him bedtime stories. He flinched when I reached out to smooth his collar. And one evening, when I placed a plate of his favorite baked ziti in front of him, he pushed it away, his small hands trembling. "I don't want it," Leo mumbled, staring at the table. "Are you feeling sick, my love?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. "Dr. Vance says you make me eat bad things," Leo whispered, his voice sounding robotic, rehearsed. "He says Auntie Ava tried to give me the magic medicine to make me strong like the other boys, but you got mad because you want me to stay weak. You want me to stay locked in the house with you forever." The air was sucked from my lungs. I looked up at Lucy, who was gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so hard her knuckles were white. "Leo, look at me," Lucy said, kneeling beside his chair. "Grandma loves you more than anything. Ava gave you something that almost killed you. You remember the hospital, right? You remember not being able to breathe?" Leo squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically. "No, doctor. Vance says I only couldn't breathe because Grandma scared me. Grandma made my chest tight. Ava loves me. Ava wants me to be a superhero." He burst into tears and ran up the stairs. Lucy stood up, her face pale with a terrifying realization. They aren't giving him therapy, Avada. They're gaslighting him. Dr. Vance is using suggestive implanting. He's brainwashing a 7-year-old boy to testify against you in family court. The sheer diabolical cruelty of it paralyzed me. Ava wasn't just trying to win a legal battle. She was systematically destroying the boy's psychological foundation to mold him into the perfect weapon against me. And because Dr. Vance was court-appointed, if we stopped taking him to the sessions, Ava would immediately report us to the judge for violating a court order, proving her point that we were denying Leo medical care. We were trapped in a burning house, and Ava had locked all the doors from the outside. "I'm going with him tomorrow," Lucy said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I don't care what the court order says. I am going to find out exactly what is happening in that room." The next afternoon, Lucy walked Leo into Dr. Vance's waiting room. The receptionist, a stern woman with heavily arched eyebrows, immediately told Lucy she had to wait outside. "I'll wait right here, thanks," Lucy said, sitting down with a magazine. But as Leo walked into the inner office and the heavy oak door clicked shut, Lucy didn't read. Before they had left the house, she had unzipped the small front pocket of Leo's red Spider-Man backpack, pressed record on an old digital audio recorder, and slipped it beneath his crayons. 45 minutes later, Leo emerged. Lucy held his hand tightly all the way to the car. The moment she locked the doors, she pulled the recorder from his bag and pressed play. "Doctor," Vance's voice filled the car, smooth, rhythmic, and hypnotic. "Now, Leo, close your eyes. Breathe in deeply. Good. Let's talk about the wedding again. You felt scared, didn't you? But who was yelling? Was it Ava? No. Ava was smiling. Grandma was the one yelling. Grandma is always angry, isn't she, Leo? Grandma makes the house feel dark. When you live with your dad and Ava, the house will be full of light. Ava will give you the special vitamins so you never have to be afraid of food again. Say it with me, Leo. Grandma wants me sick. Ava wants me strong." And then, the heartbreaking, fragile voice of my grandson echoing the poison back to him. "Grandma wants me sick. Ava wants me strong." Lucy burst through the front door of our house, her eyes blazing with tears of pure fury. She slammed the recorder onto the kitchen island. "Listen to this. Listen to what that monster is doing to him." As the recording played, my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. I put my face in my hands and wept, not just for the custody battle, but for the soul of my grandson that was being systematically dismantled for the sake of a woman's greed. We had the recording. It was proof of severe psychological abuse, but secretly recording a minor's therapy session was highly illegal in Georgia. If we brought it to the judge, it could be thrown out, and Lucy could be charged with a felony. We had the truth, but our hands were tied behind our backs. We were losing. 10 miles away, in the penthouse of a midtown high-rise, Alexander Williams stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city looked like a scattering of crushed diamonds against the velvet night. A glass of expensive bourbon sweated in his hand. Behind him, the master bedroom door was cracked open. Ava was asleep, the silk sheets tangled around her legs. Even in sleep, she looked flawless, the tragic, misunderstood victim. Alex took a slow sip of the bourbon, letting the burn slide down his throat. Everyone thought he was a fool. His mother thought he was blinded by grief and lust. His friends thought he had simply chosen the easier, prettier path. They all thought Ava had completely manipulated him at the wedding, twisting his mind with her tearful performance and forged medical documents. They were wrong. Alex had a master's degree from Georgia Tech and ran a firm that managed $50 million architectural contracts. He did not survive in the corporate world by being easily manipulated. He survived by observing structural weaknesses. And Ava's structure had a massive, glaring crack. It happened at the wedding. When his mother had stormed the stage holding the amber vial, Alex had looked at his new bride. Ava's face had crumpled into an expression of terrified innocence. But in the fraction of a second before the tears fell, before the mask fully snapped into place, Alex had seen something else. He had seen a flash of cold, calculating irritation. Not shock, not horror, irritation. Like a chess player realizing their opponent had just ruined a carefully planned sequence. And then there was the folder. When Ava's sister Gloria had handed him the medical records, Alex had noticed Ava's hands. When she held the microphone, pretending to cry, her hands were perfectly steady. But when she looked at the folder, her knuckles were white, trembling with an anxiety she couldn't hide. He didn't say anything. He had played his part perfectly. He had escorted Ava out, moved into this condo, and filed the custody papers exactly as she wanted. He became the devoted, protective husband defending his wife against his crazy mother. Because Alex knew that to catch a predator, you had to let them think they were the one hunting. He pulled his encrypted smartphone from his pocket. He didn't use his regular phone. Ava had casually asked for his passcode on their second date under the guise of total transparency. He opened a secure messaging app and typed, "Are you in place?" A moment later, a reply popped up. "Booth in the back. Come alone." Alex set his bourbon down, grabbed his coat, and quietly slipped out of the penthouse, making sure the heavy oak door clicked softly behind him. 20 minutes later, he was sitting in the back booth of a dimly lit 24-hour diner in Decatur. Across from him sat Marcus, a retired FBI forensic accountant who now ran the most discreet, ruthlessly efficient private investigation firm in the Southeast. Marcus didn't waste time on pleasantries. He slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky Formica table. "Your wife," Marcus said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "is a ghost made of debt." Alex opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, credit card histories, and offshore account logs. "Ava presented herself as a highly successful marketing director," Marcus explained, tapping a fingernail against a spreadsheet. "And she is. But what she didn't tell you is that she has a catastrophic gambling addiction, high-stakes online poker, mostly hosted on servers in the Caymans. She owes over $400,000 to people who do not care about her marketing degree. They were threatening to break her legs 3 months before she met you." Alex felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "So she targeted me for my money." "Partially," Marcus said, leaning in. "But your prenuptial agreement protects your architectural firm and your personal assets. If she divorces you, she walks away with a fraction of what she owes. That wouldn't save her." Marcus pulled out another document. It was a copy of Maria's last will and testament, specifically the details regarding Leo's trust fund. "Maria came from generational wealth," Marcus continued, his eyes locking onto Alex's. "She left a trust fund for Leo worth nearly $3 million. But the stipulations are ironclad. The money is locked until Leo is 25, overseen by a primary trustee. That trustee is your mother, Avada." Alex stared at the paper, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly snapping into a horrifying, bloody picture. "Unless," Marcus said softly, "the primary trustee is deemed legally, mentally, or physically unfit to perform her duties. If Avada is institutionalized or stripped of her rights due to mental instability, the guardianship and the financial control of the $3 million trust defaults to the sole surviving parent." "Me," Alex whispered. "You," Marcus confirmed. "And as your legal spouse, Ava would have immediate, unfettered access to that money to manage it for Leo's care." I pulled her internet search history from her office computer, Alex. 2 weeks before your wedding, she spent hours researching how to dissolve a minor's trust fund and proving mental incompetence in family court. Alex closed his eyes. The sheer scale of her sociopathy was staggering. Ava hadn't just tried to poison his son. She had orchestrated a masterclass in psychological warfare. She had used an allergy attack to frame his mother as crazy, so she could steal a dead woman's money to pay off her gambling debts. And worst of all, he had let his mother and Lucy suffer alone for a month, letting them believe he had abandoned them to gather this proof. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, his tone shifting from professional to grim. "Dr. Elias Vance, the child psychologist she recommended." Alex looked up. "What about him?" "He's not just a colleague of hers. I tracked his financial records. 3 weeks ago, Ava transferred $50,000 into a shell company owned by Vance's brother. She's paying him under the table. Whatever he's doing to your boy in those sessions, Alex, he's not healing him." The glass of water on the table trembled as Alex gripped the edge of the booth. The cold calculation that had kept him steady for the past month vanished, replaced by a violent, protective rage. Ava was attacking his mother. Ava was brainwashing his son. Alex stood up, throwing a $100 bill onto the table. He took the manila envelope and shoved it into his coat. "Keep digging, Marcus," Alex said, his voice lethal. "I want every text message, every email, every lie she ever told." "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. Alex walked out of the diner into the cool Atlanta rain. He pulled out his burner phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 4 weeks. The phone rang twice before a familiar, exhausted voice answered. "Hello?" "Lucy," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer hide. "It's me. Don't say my name. Just listen." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Alex, how dare you? I know everything," Alex interrupted, the rain soaking his hair. "I know about the debt. I know about the trust fund. And I know about Dr. Vance." Silence hung on the line, heavy and stunned. "Lucy," Alex continued, his voice breaking, "I need you to tell my mother I am so sorry. And then I need you both to meet me tomorrow night at the old warehouse down by the docks. Don't tell anyone. Don't bring your phones. We are going to end this." The rain in Atlanta doesn't just fall, it attacks. It comes down in thick, blinding sheets, turning the red clay into a slick, treacherous mirror and drowning out the noise of the city. It was the kind of rain that had taken Maria from us 3 years ago. And as I stood inside an abandoned warehouse by the shipping yards, watching my son step out of the shadows, I prayed the rain wasn't coming to claim another member of my family. Alex looked as though he had aged 10 years in a single month. His designer coat was soaked, his shoulders slumped beneath an invisible, crushing weight. When he saw me and Lucy standing in the dim light of a single, flickering overhead bulb, he broke. He fell to his knees on the cold concrete floor, burying his face in his hands, the sound of his sobs echoing off the corrugated steel walls. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice raw. "Mom, Lucy, God, I am so sorry. I was blind." I didn't offer a lecture. I didn't say I told you so. I am a mother before I am anything else. I crossed the floor, ignoring the sharp pain in my knees, and knelt beside him. I pulled his head to my chest, rocking him just as I had when he was a little boy who had scraped his knee. "We are past sorry, Alexander," I said softly, my voice firm but laced with the fierce, unconditional love that only a matriarch knows. "We are in the trenches now. Tell me you have the ammunition." Alex nodded against my shoulder. He pulled the thick manila envelope from his coat and laid it on the concrete. Over the next hour, under the harsh glare of a flashlight, Alex and Lucy walked me through the terrifying, meticulous web Ava had spun. The gambling debts in the Caymans, the plot to institutionalize me, the $50,000 bribe paid to Dr. Vance to brainwash my 7-year-old grandson. It was a masterclass in sociopathy, but Ava had made a fatal miscalculation. She had assumed Alex's grief had made him stupid. "I'm serving her tomorrow morning," Alex said, his eyes hardening into flint. "I have the divorce papers drawn up, along with a full relinquishment of any claims to Leo or the trust. I am going to put Marcus's dossier on the kitchen counter, and I am going to tell her that she has exactly 1 hour to sign everything and disappear, or I hand the entire file over to the FBI for extortion and child endangerment." "She's a cornered animal, Alex," Lucy warned, shivering in her damp jacket. "Animals like that don't just surrender. They bite." "I'm not giving her a chance to bite," Alex replied, his jaw set. "The penthouse security will be right outside the door. You two stay by the phone. Once she's gone, I am going straight to Leo's school to pick him up, and we are bringing him home. Our home." It was a solid plan. It was logical, airtight, and completely reliant on the assumption that Ava operated within the bounds of rational human behavior. But true darkness does not respect logic. The security cameras in the Midtown penthouse captured exactly what happened the next morning at 8 a.m. I watched the footage later, and the chill it sent down my spine will stay with me until the day I die. Alex walked into the pristine, ultra-modern kitchen. Ava was sitting at the marble island, sipping a green smoothie, looking like a serene yoga instructor. Alex didn't speak. He simply dropped the heavy dossier onto the marble with a resounding smack. He laid the divorce papers next to it, along with a pen. On the silent footage, I watched Ava's perfect posture stiffen. She opened the dossier. She flipped through the first few pages, the bank statements, the Cayman Island logs, the wire transfer to Dr. Vance's brother. Her reaction was chilling. There were no tears. There was no desperate, theatrical denial like at the wedding. The beautiful, radiant mask didn't just slip. It shattered, revealing the cold, calculating void underneath. Her face went entirely slack, her eyes deadening into shark-like obsidian. She looked up at Alex. Her lips moved, and though there was no audio, Alex later told me exactly what she said. You think you're so smart, Alex, but you have no idea what you've just done. She calmly picked up the pen, signed the divorce papers without reading them, and pushed them across the counter. She stood up, walked into the master bedroom, and closed the door. Alex, believing he had won, exhaled deeply and leaned against the counter, waiting for her to pack her bags. He waited 15 minutes. When he finally opened the bedroom door, the room was empty. Ava hadn't packed a bag. She had taken her purse, slipped out through the private service elevator in the walk-in closet, and vanished into the Atlanta traffic. Alex's phone rang 10 minutes later. It was the principal of Leo's elementary school. "Mr. Williams," the principal said, sounding slightly confused. "I just wanted to follow up. Your wife, Ava, just picked Leo up from his classroom. She presented the temporary emergency custody order and said there was a family emergency. Is everything all right?" Alex dropped the phone. When Alex called me, his voice was a pitch I had never heard before. Pure, unadulterated terror. "Mom, she has him. She took Leo." The world tilted on its axis. My heart seized, beating a frantic, agonizing rhythm against my ribs. "Call the police, Alex. Put out an Amber Alert." I screamed into the receiver, already sprinting toward the front door, Lucy right behind me, her car keys jingling in her trembling hands. "I can't," Alex shouted back over the sound of his car engine roaring to life. "The temporary custody order the judge signed gives her legal right to transport him. The police said they can't issue an Amber Alert unless there is proof of imminent physical danger, and right now, she's legally his guardian." "She is in imminent physical danger," I roared. "Where is she, Alex? Where would she take him?" "I don't know." I'm tracking her phone, but she turned it off. Marcus is trying to ping her car's GPS, but the storm is interfering with the satellite. I stopped dead in my tracks on the front porch. The rain was coming down in a torrential deluge, the sky bruised purple and black. Thunder rattled the windows of my house. A memory struck me with the force of a physical blow. Ava's journal. I remembered reading a specific venomous entry. They still own the house in Marietta, the shrine to St. Maria. Alex refuses to sell it. He leaves it empty, rotting in the woods, paying taxes on a ghost town just to hold on to her. If I had my way, I'd burn it to the ground with all her memories inside. "Alex," I breathed, my voice eerily calm despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "She didn't go to the airport. She didn't go to a hotel. She went to the shrine. She went to Marietta." "The old house?" Alex asked, his breath hitching. "Mom, it's abandoned. There's no power." "She went to the old house, Alex. I know it in my bones. We are on our way." The drive to Marietta was a nightmare blur of hydroplaning tires, flashing hazard lights, and deafening thunder. Lucy gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were translucent. Neither of us spoke. We were praying in the silence, begging whatever higher power was listening to spare the boy who had already lost too much. The old property sat at the end of a long, winding dirt driveway, flanked by dense Georgia pines that groaned and swayed violently in the gale-force winds. The house itself was a beautiful two-story craftsman, but now it looked like a haunted shell. The windows were dark, but parked haphazardly on the front lawn, the driver's side door left wide open to the rain, was Ava's sleek white Mercedes. I didn't wait for Lucy to park. I threw open the passenger door and ran. The rain instantly soaked through my clothes, plastering my hair to my face, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the primal protective rage of a lioness. I hit the front porch. The heavy oak door had been splintered open, the deadbolt kicked in. "Leo!" I screamed, rushing into the pitch-black foyer. The house smelled of dust, damp wood, and old memories. "Leo! Grandma is here!" A flash of lightning illuminated the living room. There, standing in the center of the room, illuminated by the harsh beam of a tactical flashlight resting on the mantel, was Ava. Her perfect hair was plastered to her skull in wet, ragged strings. Her expensive trench coat was covered in mud. She looked like a feral, beautiful demon. And in her left hand, gripped so tightly her nails were digging into his skin, was Leo. The boy was sobbing uncontrollably, his face buried in his hands. But it was what Ava held in her right hand that made the blood freeze in my veins. It wasn't a small amber vial this time. It was a large, industrial-sized glass jar. The label had been torn off, but the fine, grayish powder inside was unmistakable. "Avida," Ava said, her voice echoing in the empty, cavernous room. It wasn't the sweet, melodic purr anymore. It was a harsh, raspy snarl. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You had to go digging." "Let the boy go, Ava," I said, taking a slow, measured step forward. Lucy appeared beside me, gasping in horror at the sight of the jar. "Step back!" Ava shrieked, violently jerking Leo closer to her side. The boy let out a terrified whimper. She unscrewed the metal lid of the jar with a flick of her thumb. "Or I swear to God I will force this entire jar down his throat. He won't even make it to the ambulance this time." "Why are you doing this?" Lucy cried out, tears streaming down her face. "You have the divorce papers. You can walk away. Why hurt him?" Ava let out a bitter, echoing laugh that sent chills down my spine. "Walk away? Walk away to what, Lucy? Debt collectors who are going to break my kneecaps? Poverty? I spent 10 years watching Maria get everything I deserved. The perfect job, the perfect husband, the perfect little trust fund baby. And then, when I finally take what is rightfully mine, you two old hags ruin it." She leveled a look of pure, unadulterated hatred at me. "I'm not going to prison, Avada," Ava sneered, her eyes wide and manic. "And I'm not going back to the gutter. If I lose, I'm taking the crown jewel of this family with me. Alex loves this house so much. Let him find his son's body in it." She moved the jar toward Leo's face. Leo screamed, thrashing wildly against her grip. "No!" I roared. I didn't think. I lunged forward, throwing my 68-year-old body across the space between us. Ava swung the heavy glass jar at my head. It grazed my temple, sending a blinding flash of pain and a warm trickle of blood down my cheek. But I didn't stop. I crashed into her, my hands clawing at her coat, trying to wedge myself between her and my grandson. We fell to the dusty hardwood floor in a tangle of limbs. Ava was younger, stronger, and fueled by desperate madness. She kicked me hard in the ribs, sending me rolling backward. Ava scrambled to her feet, panting heavily. She grabbed Leo by the collar of his jacket, pulling him up. She raised the open jar, her eyes wild. "Open your mouth, you little brat!" she screamed at the sobbing child. "Ava, stop!" The voice didn't come from me. It didn't come from Lucy. It came from the dark hallway leading to the kitchen. A figure stepped into the ambient glow of the flashlight. She was trembling from head to toe, her clothes soaking wet, holding a smartphone with the camera lens pointed directly at Ava. It was Gloria, Ava's younger sister. Ava froze, the jar inches from Leo's face. "Gloria, what the hell are you doing here?" Gloria was crying, but her hands holding the phone were remarkably steady. "I followed you, Ava. When you left the penthouse in a panic, I followed your car. I couldn't let you do it. Not again." "Put the phone down, you idiot!" Ava shrieked. "I am doing this for us, for our family." "You're doing this for yourself," Gloria yelled back, her voice cracking with years of suppressed trauma. "You've always done this for yourself. You manipulate everyone. You manipulated me at the wedding." Gloria took a step forward, the camera still rolling. The twist. "I didn't accidentally drop that vial under the table, Ava," Gloria confessed, her voice ringing clear over the sound of the thunder. "When you handed it to me and told me to slip it into his soup, I knew what it was. I knew he was allergic. But I was so terrified of you. I couldn't say no to your face. So I purposefully dropped it right where his grandmother was sitting. I wanted her to find it. I wanted her to stop the wedding so I wouldn't have to be an accomplice to murder." Ava's face contorted in absolute shock, followed instantly by a terrifying, demonic rage. The betrayal of her own blood shattered the last remaining fragments of her sanity. "You little traitor!" Ava screamed, dropping Leo's collar and turning toward her sister. That momentary distraction was all we needed. The front door burst open entirely, crashing against the interior wall with a deafening bang. Alex stormed into the room like an avenging angel, soaked in rain, his eyes blazing. He didn't hesitate. Before Ava could even turn back toward Leo, Alex crossed the room in 3 massive strides and tackled her. They hit the floor hard. The glass jar flew from Ava's hand, shattering against the brick fireplace. A cloud of lethal, grayish oyster powder bloomed into the air, settling harmlessly into the dust. Alex pinned Ava to the floor, his forearm pressed against her collarbone, his face inches from hers. "If you ever touch my son again," Alex snarled, his voice a low, terrifying vibration, "I will kill you myself." Ava struggled for a moment, her nails scratching at Alex's arms, but the fight abruptly left her. She looked at the shattered glass, looked at Gloria's phone still recording, and realized the inescapable truth. Her flawless script had been burned to ashes. Outside, cutting through the roar of the storm, the distinct wailing siren of Atlanta police cruisers began to echo through the trees. Gloria had called them before she even walked into the house. I ignored the throbbing pain in my ribs and crawled across the floor to Leo. The boy threw his arms around my neck, burying his wet face in my shoulder, trembling violently. "I've got you, my sweet boy," I whispered, crying tears of profound relief into his hair as Lucy rushed over to wrap her arms around us both. "Grandma's got you. The monster is gone." I looked up at Alex, who was holding Ava down as the red and blue police lights began to flash through the windows, painting the dark room in the colors of justice. We were bruised, bleeding, and utterly exhausted. But as the heavy boots of the officers hit the front porch, I knew the war was finally over. We had dragged the darkness out from under the table, and my family had survived the light. The red and blue lights of the Atlanta police cruisers sliced through the torrential rain, painting the walls of the ruined Marietta house in strobes of violent color. The storm outside was finally beginning to break, the thunder rolling away into the distance, leaving behind only the steady, exhausted rhythm of the downpour. I sat on the dusty floor of the living room, my arms locked fiercely around my grandson. Leo's face was buried in the crook of my neck, his small hands clutching the damp fabric of my dress. He had stopped crying, his exhaustion having finally overtaken his terror. Beside us, Lucy rested a trembling hand on my shoulder, her eyes wide as she watched the final act of Ava's play come to a close. Two officers hauled Ava to her feet. The mud from the driveway was smeared across her designer trench coat. Her perfect honey blonde hair hung in ragged, wet clumps around a face that was completely devoid of its former angelic glow. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists that, just weeks ago, had worn thousands of dollars of bridal jewelry, she didn't fight. The manic energy that had fueled her in the dark had evaporated. She looked at Alex. My son stood by the shattered front door, the rain dripping from his jaw, watching the woman he had almost given his life to. Ava's lips parted, perhaps to offer one final desperate lie, one last manipulation. But Alex just turned his back on her. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That heavy, absolute silence was the final nail in the coffin of her illusions. "Watch your head," one of the officers muttered, guiding Ava out into the rain and pressing her into the back of the cruiser. Gloria stood near the porch, wrapped in a shock blanket an EMT had given her. She looked incredibly young and incredibly fragile. I gently untangled myself from Leo, letting Lucy hold him, and walked slowly over to the young woman who had just sacrificed her only sister to save my family. "Gloria," I said softly, my voice hoarse. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Williams. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have stopped her at the wedding." I reached out and placed my hand over hers. "You spoke up when it mattered most. You walked into the dark and brought the truth with you. Do not carry her sins on your shoulders. You saved my grandson tonight, and for that, you will always have a place at my table." Gloria let out a ragged sob and nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. The ride home was a quiet, surreal blur. Alex drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, his eyes fixed on the wet asphalt. I sat in the back with Leo, whose head rested heavy and warm against my side, fast asleep. Lucy sat in the passenger seat, occasionally reaching over the console to rest her hand briefly on Alex's arm, a silent anchor in the turbulent sea of his guilt. The days that followed were not a sudden return to perfect happiness. Trauma does not vanish simply because the monster has been locked outside the gates. It leaves claw marks on the walls. It leaves a lingering chill in the hallways. The legal fallout was swift and merciless. Marcus, the private investigator Alex had hired, delivered his comprehensive dossier to the Fulton County District Attorney. The evidence was insurmountable. Between Gloria's recorded video, the forged medical documents, the offshore gambling debts, and the financial trail leading directly to the corrupt child psychologist, Ava's high-priced defense attorneys advised her to take a plea deal. I attended her sentencing 3 months later. I sat in the front row of the courtroom wearing my Sunday best, a stark contrast to Ava, who wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. Her skin was pale, her hair pulled back into a severe, lifeless knot. When the judge struck the gavel, sentencing her to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder, she didn't look back at us. She just stared at the floor, finally swallowed by the void she had tried to pull us into. Justice didn't stop with her. Doctor, Elias Vance, the suave, high-priced psychologist who had manipulated my grandson's fragile mind, was stripped of his medical license within weeks. The FBI raided his pristine Sandy Springs office, uncovering a horrifying history of accepting bribes to skew custody evaluations. He was led out of his building in handcuffs, his reputation destroyed, facing a lengthy prison sentence of his own. The external threats had been neutralized, but the hardest work, the internal rebuilding of our family, was just beginning. It started on a quiet Sunday evening. The house was still, smelling faintly of the lavender polish Lucy used on the hardwood floors. I was sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, an unread book in my lap, when Alex walked into the living room. He looked tired, the dark circles under his eyes a testament to the sleepless nights he had spent confronting his own failures. He didn't sit on the sofa. He walked over and knelt on the rug right in front of my chair, looking up at me just as he had when he was a little boy who had broken a neighbor's window. "Mom," Alex said, his voice cracking, "I don't know how to ask for your forgiveness. I let a stranger come into our home and convince me that the woman who gave me life was my enemy. I abandoned you. I abandoned Lucy. I put my son in the hands of a predator because I was too weak to carry my own grief." I looked at my son. I saw the gray at his temples, the heavy lines framing his mouth. He had been a victim of Ava's manipulation, yes, but he was also a man who had chosen the path of least resistance when it came to his pain. I reached out and cupped his face in my hands. The skin was rough with stubble, wet with tears. "Alexander," I said gently, my thumbs brushing the tears away. "You were drowning. When a man is drowning, he will grab onto anything that looks like a life raft, even if it's made of poison. I am angry. I was heartbroken. But I am your mother. My forgiveness isn't something you have to earn back. It is yours by right. But you have a debt to pay to this family, and you pay it by never looking away again. You pay it by being the father that boy needs." Alex nodded, burying his face in my hands, weeping with the profound, shattering relief of a man who has finally been allowed to lay down a crushing burden. From that day forward, Alex fundamentally changed. He stepped down from his position as a senior partner at the architectural firm, taking a role as a consultant that allowed him to work from home 3 days a week. The 80-hour work weeks vanished. He became a fixture in Leo's life again. He was the one cooking breakfast, the one waiting at the school bus stop, the one sitting patiently on the floor building intricate Lego castles for hours on end. But the healing of Leo's mind was a delicate, terrifying process. The gaslighting he had endured at the hands of Dr. Vance and Ava had left deep, confusing scars. For the first few months, Leo would still hesitate before eating the food I prepared. He would look at me with wide, uncertain eyes, the poisoned words of the psychologist echoing in his small head. "Grandma wants me sick." It was Lucy who broke the spell. One evening, I placed a plate of grilled chicken and rice in front of Leo. He stared at it, his hands tucked beneath his thighs, his lower lip trembling. I felt a familiar pang of heartbreak, preparing to gently encourage him. But Lucy sat down right next to him. She didn't push the plate closer. She didn't offer a distraction. She just looked at him with an expression of pure, unwavering honesty. "Leo," Lucy said softly, "do you remember the night it rained really hard? The night your dad came into the old house?" Leo nodded slowly, his eyes darting to the floor. "Who was standing in front of you when Ava tried to hurt you?" Lucy asked. Leo swallowed hard. "Grandma?" "That's right," Lucy said, her voice steady and warm. "Grandma threw herself right at the danger to keep it away from you. She got hurt so you wouldn't have to be. People who want you to be sick don't do that, Leo. People who want you to be sick don't fight monsters for you. Only people who love you more than the whole world do that." Leo looked at Lucy, and then he looked up at me. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, the logic of love finally overpowering the logic of manipulation. He reached out with a small, hesitant hand, picked up his fork, and took a bite of the chicken. I had to leave the room so he wouldn't see me cry. It took time, but the shadows in Leo's eyes slowly began to recede. We found him a new therapist, a wonderful, warm woman named Dr. Evans who specialized in trauma recovery, whom Alex vetted with the intensity of an FBI director. Slowly, the laughter returned to the hallways. The hypervigilance faded. And as the seasons changed, I watched another beautiful transformation take root in our home. Alex and Lucy had always shared a sibling-like bond, forged in the fires of Maria's death and tempered by the nightmare of Ava's reign. But as they worked side by side to rebuild Leo's world, that bond shifted. It evolved into something deeper, something grounded in profound mutual respect and an unshakable shared devotion to the boy they both loved. I noticed it in the small things. The way Alex would brew Lucy a cup of chamomile tea and leave it on the counter for her when she was grading kindergarten papers late at night. The way Lucy's face would light up when Alex walked into the room. The way they would stand in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side, talking in low, intimate murmurs long after Leo had gone to sleep. It was not a sudden, fiery romance. It was a slow, deliberate dawn. It was the love of two people who had seen the absolute worst of the world and had decided that the safest place to be was beside each other. A year and a half after the storm in Marietta, on a crisp Thanksgiving afternoon, the house was filled with the smell of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and wood smoke. The dining room table was set. There was no expensive ivory linen. There were no imported white lilies. Instead, there was a simple rustic tablecloth that Lucy had bought at a local market, covered in mismatched plates, bowls of steaming collard greens, sweet potato casserole, and a massive, perfectly browned turkey. Leo was sitting at the table, now 9 years old and growing taller by the minute. He was arguing passionately with Alex about whether Batman could defeat Iron Man in a fair fight. His laughter, loud, bright, and completely unburdened, echoed off the walls. Lucy emerged from the kitchen, wearing an apron over her dress, carrying a tray of fresh, allergen-free dinner rolls she had baked herself. Alex immediately stood up to take the tray from her hands, his fingers lingering over hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. He looked down at her with an expression of such pure, uncomplicated adoration that my heart swelled. "All right, everyone sit down," Alex announced, placing the rolls on the table and pulling out a chair for Lucy before taking his own seat next to Leo. I sat at the head of the table. I looked at the three of them. I looked at the warmth in the room, the safety we had fought so desperately to reclaim. Alex raised his glass of sparkling cider. "Before we eat, I just want to say something." He looked at Leo, then at Lucy, and finally his gaze settled on me. "I am thankful for second chances. I am thankful for the truth. And most importantly, I am thankful for the women in this family who taught me that true strength isn't about building walls. It's about who you let inside them." "Amen," Lucy whispered, smiling. "Amen," Leo echoed happily, already reaching for a dinner roll. I raised my glass, a deep, resonant peace settling into my bones. People often think of family as a rigid, predetermined thing, a picture frame filled with the people who happen to share your blood. But I know better now. Family is not just a biological coincidence. It is an active, ongoing choice. Family is the daughter who is born from a foster home, but shares the very rhythm of your heart. It is the son who loses his way in the dark, but has the courage to crawl back to the light. It is the little boy who learns to trust again after the world tells him not to. And sometimes, family is the act of refusing to accept the beautiful, flawless surface of things. It is the willingness to be called paranoid, to be called difficult, to be called crazy by a world that values polite silence over ugly truths. If there is one thing my 69 years on this earth have taught me, it is this. Evil does not usually announce itself with a roar. It does not kick down the front door. It smiles. It brings expensive wine. It offers to fold your laundry. And it speaks in a sweet, melodic purr. It relies on the assumption that you will be too polite to question its perfection. So let them call you difficult. Let them call you paranoid. Keep your eyes sharp. Keep your heart fiercely protective of the ones you love, and never, ever be afraid to lift the tablecloth and look down into the dark. Because sometimes the only thing standing between your family and absolute ruin is your willingness to look under the table.